Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of My Bigfoot Sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of run-down no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My name is Jonny. Vic had me on, I think it was episode 194, and I pretty much explained how I got involved into this topic. Starting around 2017-ish, 2018, I started having, unexplained activity around my property that ended up being Sasquatch. And I basically became completely and totally infatuated with the fact that these creatures were real. And I think when I left off, we were talking about our group, the Sasquatch Encounter Brigade, and how it all, came together. My partner, one of the original founders, Captain Joe Cayley, he was an Army Ranger. He was injured in Iraq. He eventually lost his leg. Actually got a medal from Obama for saving civilians. Pretty awesome story. Very awesome guy. We became pretty good friends after he contacted me about the sighting that he had on a military rifle range. He was in charge of what's known as the Mammoth Sniper Challenge. And he worked for Grunt Style. All the people out there that watch, I believe, Expedition Bigfoot, Russell Accord, he wears the military T-shirts. That's Grunt Style. Well, that just so happened to be the company that Captain Joe worked for. And they were the sponsors of this, sniper challenge. Had shooters from all over the world, police departments, other militaries, and civilian. And they were out there shooting, and he was in charge of the whole thing. And he's, watching these shooters shoot. And he actually watched a Sasquatch walk across the road out beyond the furthest berm. And they actually had to call ceasefire and stop the whole thing. And they ended up going down there. And it was pretty major event for him in his life, and had a pretty profound effect on him. So him and I, when we started talking, I guess, we were both in the military. So I understood just how much of a shock that must have been, being in that position and shooting on those ranges and knowing how it's a extremely controlled environment and everything else, and him and I just bonded, became friends. And he eventually in 2021 asked me if I want to start doing a podcast. And initially I had no interest in doing something like that, but I guess for me, I listened to a lot of podcasts and listened to a lot of witnesses. And I was also trying to find like researchers and people involved in this, and just witnesses in general that were credible people, And Captain Joe seemed to be extremely credible. And that was, it was a pretty big deal for me. So I agreed to do that because I thought it was important, to bring forward stories like Captain Joe's. So him and I started the podcast. But my main goal was to start a research group. And we called it the Sasquatch Encounter Brigade, which is on YouTube right now. So we started kind of putting a little team together, and it was just people that we knew from Georgia from other Facebook pages. Another lady by the name of Angie Williamson. I kind of recruited her. She's really good at doing sighting reports and stuff like that. And we brought her on, and we started talking to other people and making friends in the community and people around Georgia. But we were contacted in 2021 by a guy by the name of Happy Harris. And both Happy and Captain Joe are from kind of the same general area outside of Augusta. Happy grew up out there. And he contacted Captain Joe at first to tell him his story. And Captain Joe's like, hey, man, you really need to talk to this guy. He's got a crazy story, and I know the area. Captain Joe actually had a hunting cabin, but about 20, 25 minutes away from the property where this guy had his event take place. So I ended up talking to Happy, and I'll tell you straight up before I even tell you the story. When Captain Joe actually told me the story at first, I didn't believe him. Like, I thought he was full of garbage. I was just not convinced because it was just so over the top. Anyway, I ended up talking to Happy, and he told me his story, which happened. He was, he's in his mid 50s now, but he was 19 years old, and he had a best friend that owned this property out in East Georgia. And it's, I want to say around 300 acres, something like that. But anyway, it's a King's Grant, which means this property has been in the same family's name since before America was America. And that's the first thing that kind of piqued my interest. But he said at 19 years old, he would go out there with his buddy, the property owner's son, and they would go hunting and stuff. And there used to be a pond out there. They used to go fishing and hunting and all that good stuff. Well, he went out there by himself one afternoon, and there's a big pipeline clearing that runs right through the middle of this property, and it's got woods on either side. He walked out there. He parked his truck. He had to cross a creek. He walked down the pipeline clearing, and he came to a spot where it looked like somebody had made a makeshift blind, where they just took pine saplings and leaned them up against a tree. And he thought that's what it was. He thought somebody had been using it to hunt out of. So he got down in this blind and leaned up against this pine tree. And he said about 30 minutes after sitting in this blind, leaned up against a tree, two of these creatures, two Sasquatch. Now, he never saw them. He just assumed they were Sasquatch. Came up behind him and screamed at him in what people know as the samurai chatter. Sounds like somebody speaking Russian underwater, or, a samurai underwater is kind of how people describe it. But there were two of these creatures, and they screamed at him in this, crazy gibberish. And it scared him so bad that he passed out. He said he woke up 30 minutes later, sitting in the front seat of his truck with the door open and his rifle's laying on the ground. And he has no idea to this day how he got back to his truck. And when I heard that secondhand from Captain Joe, that's, I was like, yeah, this guy's, I'm not really buying this story, but, I'll talk to him. And I ended up talking to him on the phone and getting to know him a little bit. And I was like, man, I really believe this guy. Well, we were already looking for, none of us had met in person yet. And we were already looking for, a viable area to kind of get together and do research and everything else, meet each other and make the group kind of official. So we decided that we would go out to this property where Happy had his event take place, and he got permission from the property owner. And it was a great thing for him too. After this event happened, when he was 19 years old, it pretty much scared him out of the woods. That was it for him. He was done. He said he went duck hunting a few times and went fishing, but deer hunting, stuff like that, hog hunting, he never really did it again. That event was so traumatic that, and, he kept it to himself pretty much almost his whole adult life. He didn't even tell his best friend who owned that property. So that was kind of a big deal for him to get back in contact with his friend again and kind of tell him everything that happened. And they, started hanging out again. And he got permission. So we put a team together. It was Captain Joe, me, Happy, a guy named Scott, and another dude named Joey, and the property owner. Now, the plan was to go to Captain Joe's cabin, hunting cabin, which is 25 minutes away. We were going to stay there, but we were going to go out to this other property and just look around. And my main goal at this point in time, I had very, very little actual research experience. None of us really had much experience. Scott did. He had been out on BFRO expeditions, but none of us really knew what we were doing. I had been to North Georgia with a buddy of mine looking in a couple areas, and we had some interesting things happen in this one particular spot. But other than the stuff that had happened on my property, we really had no experience. So we put this team together and we go out there and we get to the property, and Happy is looking. Basically, my entire goal is to kind of do a little mini documentary of like the story of Happy Harris and how this all happened and him, getting back out in the woods again and all this stuff. So I wanted to interview him from where, his event took place. So we all walk to this little patch of wood. We park, we get out, we walk, we go to this little patch of woods, and we come out on this pipeline clearing. And Happy is walking up and down the pipeline looking for the general area where his event took place. And we weren't there for maybe 6 or 8 minutes, if that. And Scott yells out, "I've got tracks." And about the same time that he says that, I'm looking on the ground and I find tracks. And what it looks like, it's all kind of tall grass out there and it's all pretty wet. But it looks like somebody with a really big foot just came running through there and left impressions. You could even see the toe impressions. And there was a bunch of them out there. And it was probably only about 20 yards away from this big deer feeder. The property owner, they're pretty well off, and they've got, really nice deer stands, really nice feeders and all that stuff out there. But I was floored by, being out there 6-8 minutes and we're finding these tracks. Well, we end up following the tracks out into the woods, and there's a big creek that runs through this property, and it crosses the pipeline, and it runs kind of on either side of the wood lines that, are on either side of the pipeline. And they start out, it's like pine saplings, and then the closer you get to the creek, it's all hardwoods. So we follow these tracks into the woods, and we come up on these, they just like beds, like pine straw beds, like a perfect circle. Like something just took its hands and raked it all to the middle, and like something had been laying in it. And we thought I'd never seen anything like that in my life. And the closest thing that any of us could come to, besides possibly being some type of Sasquatch bed, was the hogs will do that sometimes. But Captain Joe actually worked for a TV program called The Pig Man. And the Pig Man professionally hunts hogs for a living on TV. And we ended up showing him, and he said, "No, those aren't hog beds. I don't know what that is, blah, blah, blah." So anyway, that wound up being extremely interesting. So all in all, that very first day, I'm blown away. Like, I can't believe we found tracks out here. And keep in mind, this is over 30 years from when Happy's event took place at 19 years old until we're back out there. And I think that's around February 2022 is when we started going out there. So we have all that stuff happen, or we find all that stuff. And that night or that evening, I think the property owner ends up playing like coyote calls, and we may or may not have played Bigfoot calls over, the radio in his truck. I can't remember. I do remember playing coyote calls, but half the team went back to Captain Joe's cabin, and me, Happy, and Scott stayed behind. And we built a fire, And maybe about 45 minutes to an hour after they left, we heard a very close, very loud vocalization. And in person, it almost sounded like weird canine, but in the audio itself, it's actually the vocalization in the intro to like the past couple of videos I've done. It's obviously not canine. Very loud, very obvious. And then there's like 3 howls. And then there's like 3 caveman sounding howls. It goes, oh, just mind blowing. But we record these vocalizations and we're all kind of getting excited. You know, we didn't know exactly what was going on, you know, because we hadn't listened to the audio yet, but it just sounded off. Maybe 40, 45 minutes later, me, Happy, and Scott are standing around that fire, and I start hearing something in the wood line. And the only way I know how to describe it sounds like something like stomping or something hitting the ground. It's just kind of muffled. And I asked the other guys, I'm like, hey, y'all hear that? And they said, hear what? I'm like, just behind me. It's like something keeps hitting the ground. And about the time I say that, a rock comes flying out of the woods and hits my vehicle. Now, our vehicles are parked almost not really in the middle of the pipeline, but they're in the pipeline clearing, and there's no trees overhead. And it's very obviously a rock. And it hits my vehicle. And, you know, it's kind of funny because I'm super excited that this is happening. But then again, I've got a brand new vehicle and they just hit it with a rock. So in the recording, I think I use about every swear word there is all at once. But that rock hits my vehicle, and now I had a GoPro actually sitting on the back of my vehicle. So the audio, the first vocalization, and what's about to happen, you know, the rock and what happens after that, actually, we've got audio of every bit of that. So you can hear the rock, you can kind of hear us freaking out. And there's a couple other like grunts and huffs. And Happy reaches down to grab his flashlight, and he goes to turn it on, and I tell Happy, don't shine. I don't want him shining in the woods. I don't want him to scare him off. And he just clicks it on real quick and clicks it off again. Well, in the audio, you can hear, well, I say whatever. I know exactly what it was. But whatever it is in that wood line reacting to Happy turning on that flashlight. It actually goes, oh. I mean, it's one of the craziest vocals I've recorded. But that was pretty much all that happened that night. I had a thermal camera on me. We looked all in that wood line, couldn't find anything. But, you know, that's our very first trip out there. We find that evidence there during the day. And then we have those interactions at night, and my mind is blown. Everybody's super excited, super happy. I guess I was surprised that they were still there after 30 years. But then when you look at this place on a map, it's not really a surprise. This is an extremely rural county, just surrounded by farms, woods, creeks, and that's about it for miles and miles and miles. But it became very obvious that these creatures were still on that property, you know, after 30 years, which that in itself was amazing. But before I go any further, I don't normally give out advice, but there's one thing I will say to anybody who's getting involved in doing Sasquatch research. If you have seen or heard enough to get interested, but you hadn't had your own sighting yet or anything, but you're wanting to, and you're wanting to get involved in Sasquatch research, and you're actually going to take the time to go out in the woods and start looking for these creatures, proceed as if you know they are real, because you're going to end up kicking yourself. You may end up with opportunities of a lifetime and not be ready because you still have that little bit of doubt in the back of your mind. And that's eventually kind of what happens to us. You know, I had had tons of things happen on my property, and I had my one nighttime sighting, but there was still part of me that I guess I didn't want to commit. I didn't want to be wrong, and I didn't want to look stupid. So I still held back, 5 or 10%. But after that event, it kind of creeped up a little more. Now I'm at like 95% sure these things are real. As a group, we end up going out there another time. Nothing happens. And the third trip out there, it was April 22nd, 2022. Me and Scott DeForest, we go out there first. We get out there probably, I don't know, maybe 11 o'clock in the morning, something like that. Him and I go and check out the other side of the woods that we had not been on before, or we'd been on, but not a lot. Him and I went walking around, and I was recording while we were over there on that side. I was recording in front of me. All I had was a cell phone. I hadn't purchased a bunch of gear yet and all that stuff. But I did have a GoPro that I attached to the back of my pack to record behind myself. So me and Scott, we go walking around, like checking things out on that side. We go down to the creek, and we actually find what looks like handprints in the sand, or something had squatted down, put its hands in the sand, and just drug them back, and that was pretty cool. We come walking back out, and on our way out, we find what people refer to as an asterisk. It's basically just a structure where they take saplings and they stack them almost like a teepee, kind of. And underneath that structure was a 10-point deer skull. And him and I were like, this is, to this day, I'm not necessarily 100% sold on structures. I do know they do leave sticks, like one individual marking sticks. But at that point, I really wasn't all that. I'd heard of structures, and then I'd look for them on my property and all that, but I still wasn't 100% sold. But when I saw that, I was like, man, maybe there's something to this. So him and I find this stuff. Well, Captain Joe and Happy get there that afternoon, and we are hanging out in the middle of the afternoon in the middle of this pipeline clearing. And on the other side of the property, there's a logging operation going on. And we're just hanging out, shooting the breeze, talking about things, tell them about the things we found on the other side. I don't know how long we were out there, maybe 2 hours, something like that. And Happy ends up having to leave because he's got to work the next day. So it's just me, Captain Joe, and Scott DeForest. And again, our vehicles are parked in the middle of that pipeline clearing. Well, Captain Joe and I decide that we want to go, because the second trip out there, we didn't find anything new, but what we did find interesting is it looked like something had been keeping up with those pine straw beds that we found. It's like they were being kept clean. So we wanted to check them again. So him and I walked out there. They're probably not even 100 yards away from where our camp was, inside the wood line. We go out there, we look around. We don't notice anything different. So we go towards the creek. I want to say him and I are there just walking on that side of the property for maybe 45 minutes, something like that. And it's in the video because keep in mind now I'm recording behind myself with this GoPro, but I had quit recording in front of me. And I even tell him and I have a discussion. Well, yeah, they're probably not here right now. Maybe they'll come by at night, because I was 100% convinced. That's another thing. You hear all these rules and regulations, and people say Sasquatch will do this and Sasquatch won't do that. It's best to just assume that anything can happen, because I got caught up in all those rules. I did not think that after we'd been out there for several hours in the middle of the day, that anything was actually possible. That the rule is if you're in the woods, they know you're there, right? You're not going to sneak up on one. So him and we decide, all right, well, that's it. Let's go ahead and walk back. And keep in mind now, Captain Joe, he's got a prosthetic leg. Him and I are very loud. He's moving kind of slow. He's pretty loud, walking through the woods with that prosthetic leg. And we're probably about 60 feet away from each other, talking back and forth. And I cross this little creek, and I make, 10, 15 steps, and I come to this, it's like a sapling laying down, just on the ground. And I do this little stutter step, and I do a 360, and I step over it, and I straighten back up. And I take about 5 or 6 more steps. And to this day, I couldn't tell you why. I stopped dead in my tracks, and I looked over to my right. And standing there, just as clear as could be, only 50 feet away, completely unobstructed, was a Sasquatch. And we started calling it the juvenile only because it was about my size. It wasn't bulky at all. It wasn't very tall. Like I said, I'm only 5'11". So it was about my size. It was kind of crouched down a little bit, but it's kind of hard to do verbally. But if you imagine it's looking at me head on, it's got its left arm up, kind of like it's bent at the elbow, with his hand kind of just under his chin. His right arm is bent underneath it, kind of the same way, almost like you're gonna doggy paddle in the pool. But instead of your arms being next to each other, the right one was underneath the left elbow. It was all solid black, except for its face was gray, and I could see the gray on the, I could tell its palms were gray, or at least the side of its hand was gray. I could see the skin. It had a white goatee, and it had, and I guess from a distance, you might call it a comb head, but to me, it almost looked like a cowlick. Its hair stuck up and kind of came to a point, like right at the top. And its chin was kind of towards its chest, and it was kind of scowling at me like it was frowning. So if you can imagine this thing standing there almost in a doggy paddle position with its arms like looking over its eyelids at me, like scowling. It didn't look mean. It just kind of looked, I don't know, maybe irritated a little bit is my only, I guess, the best way to describe it. But I saw it. There was no question in my mind what I was looking at. 100% completely unobstructed. Well, pretty much I had a decision to make. I had the GoPro running on my backpack, but I had my cell phone in my pocket. So the only thing I could think to do was pretend like I didn't see it. And I stuck my hand in my pocket, and at the same time, I turned my back towards it to try to get it on video. And then when I turned my back, I had my hand in my pocket. I pull out the cell phone, I turn on video, and I turn back around. And now it's gone. And after it's gone, I yell out to Joe, I swear to God, they're here. I just saw one. And I run back to him, and I'm convinced I've got this thing on the GoPro video. I'm like, dude, take it off my pack. I got to get that SD card. I got to protect it, blah, blah, blah. And we're fumbling around with it and everything, and finally get it off. I'm like, all right, just act like nothing happened. And I'm going to go out here where the track, or where it was standing. I'm going to see if there's tracks out there. So I start walking out there, and I get to around where it was, and I'm looking around everywhere, and then I keep going. I'm convinced that it went away from us, which is crazy. And only thing I can guess is that it was shock, because if you actually go and watch the video, you can hear it running away and crashing through the woods, and the birds are going nuts and everything. When I'm standing there looking at it, and then I turn my back to it to try to get it on video, it actually goes around my right side and eventually ends up getting in front of me. And when I turn around, I have no idea. So I go out, I don't know, maybe 50 yards away, going back towards the creek, trying to find if it's still out there, see if I can see anything. And then Captain Joe, after about 8 minutes of me walking around, he yells out, "I see it." So I turn back around and I come towards him, and I'm like, what did you see? And he tells me that there's shooting lanes out there. There's a deer stand kind of on the edge of the pipeline clearing. And then running out in 3 different directions are clearings, shooting lanes. Well, where they had cleared that area out, they had piled up dirt. And Captain Joe said that when he's facing kind of away from where I'm at towards camp, this thing comes walking out from behind that hump of there, that big pile of dirt. And he watches it from the waist up behind that pile of dirt and then go into the woods. It just walked right out in front of it. So I call Scott and I tell Scott, "Hey man, me and Captain Joe just saw one of these things. It's headed your direction. It's headed back towards camp." So Joe and I are talking about it, freaking out, excited, can't believe this happened. And as we're talking, we start hearing the sound of stuff being broken. And we stop and we're listening, like, this thing is actually making noise again up ahead of us. So we just start following in the direction of the noise, and it's actually going back towards our camp, down the trail that we took. And there's like 2 little creeks we got to cross right there. And I jump over one of them, and I come to the other one. And I see, at first, I think it's footprints, but it's not. It's actually fingerprints where this thing went down on all 4s. And there's 4 just perfect, just as fresh as can be fingerprints right there in the mud. Like pretty, and I actually, in the video, I put mine right next to it. They look exactly the same. As we're examining this thing starts making noise again up ahead of us. So we just keep on following, and we follow and follow and follow. I think it makes noise one more time. We come out to the end of the trail, into the pipeline clearing, and Scott is standing on the back of this truck, probably about 80 yards away, 75, 80 yards away. And we're yelling at him, "Dude, we can't believe this has happened, blah, blah, blah." And then he starts saying something, and we can't tell what he said. So we kind of run up to him, wanting to tell our story, but now he's wanting to tell his story. He ended up seeing it. And what had happened is, after we called him, he went and got in the back of his truck with a pair of binoculars. And he said that he sees this thing come out on all 4s, and he can't tell what in the world he's looking at until it turns left towards him and then like does a button hook to go back in the woods. And he said it was a Sasquatch. Now, going by his description, the same exact one that me and Joe saw, but it's doing what people call the spider crawl, where its hands and I guess forearms are underneath its chest, and its elbows are bowed out, and its legs are kind of bowed out in the same manner. He said this thing comes out of the woods, does a button hook, goes back in the wood line, and only about 10 yards away, me and Joe pop out of the woods. So this thing had stayed just up ahead of us the whole time, making noise, intentionally drawing us back to that pipeline, which was just absolutely mind-blowing. The whole event was mind-blowing. So we get done, start making phone calls. First person I call is Happy Harris. I'm like, "Happy, dude, you're not crazy. Not only are these things real, they are out here. You have 100% vindication." And we're all celebrating, and I'm frantically trying to download my GoPro video and everything else. And I started recording after the event happened. I got my phone out. I kept recording that whole time. Now, eventually, kind of skip ahead to the end, I did not get it on the GoPro, but I did get it on the cell phone. But it's only one fairly decent screenshot of the face probably 30 yards away in the wood line while it's waiting. We had no idea it was there. While we're crossing the creek, it's back in the wood line, like hunched down at the bottom of this tree. And that's the only thing we got out of that. Well, we get done as if that's not enough, and that if this isn't, unbelievable enough. After I call Happy and we're all talking about it and getting everything together and download video, maybe 45 minutes goes by. It's probably maybe 45 minutes before sunset, something like that. Scott DeForest yells, "There's another one." And we look up and there is a bigger one running across the field on all fours right in front of us, probably about 80 yards away, maybe, if that, 70, 80 yards away. And it comes out from the same area that we came out when we followed the other one. It runs directly across the pipeline, hits the wood line, turns right, runs down the tree line until it hits the creek, and it takes a left and goes in the woods. And obviously our minds are completely gone or completely blown. And from then on out, I officially became a Sasquatch researcher. It was, I'd put it to you like this. There's 3 or 4 nights a week where I lay down at night and the last thing I think about is that day. And the same thing pretty much goes through my head, that I still can't believe they're real. I cannot believe we saw them. And, pretty much got hooked after that. And we've been doing it, or I've been doing it ever since. There's been people in the group that gone on and done their own things, and Captain Joe got busy, but I ended up kind of putting a small team together, a guy named Lloyd, another guy named Hank, and we still continue to go out there with Happy Harris and the property owner. Nothing else has happened out there when it comes to like group sightings. I've had a few situations where there's been rock throwing. We had one guy came out there and he just came out there to hunt. There's a bunch of hogs out there. He came out there to hog hunt with us, and he didn't know anything about these creatures. And while he was out standing on the edge of this field at night with a thermal, he comes back and tells us that he saw a big upright creature through his thermal, and just as the luck always goes, he didn't know how to record on the thermal. He had just bought it. So yet again, another opportunity to film, one of these things on that property, and it didn't happen. But there's been a couple little things that have happened over the years, but nothing, quite like the day of our sightings. I've gotten some good vocalizations out there. There are people that talk about the fact that they believe Sasquatch mimic owls. I described in the first episode I did with you how I had that happen, but with juveniles, where they mimicked an owl, and then when I mimicked the owl back, they did a really bad mimic of my bad mimic. It was pretty unique thing that happened. But I have recorded what people call the 200-pound owl, where it sounds like a massive owl that's just fake. I've got that recorded out there. That's a pretty good recording. But all in all, that's pretty much all that's happened out there. By the time we got to, I pretty much split my time throughout the year. There's 3 months out of the year where I have activity on my own property. And it's usually like the end of September. No, let's see. Yeah, September, October, and November is usually when I have activity here on my property. And then when hunting season's over with, we end up going to our main research area, which we call the Happy Place. So we get out there as much as possible, but it's about a 3-hour drive for just about all of us now. But we get out there as much as possible. And then we also go out to North Georgia, checked out a lot of places out there. But that is pretty much how I spend all my free time now, is trying to gather evidence to prove these creatures are real, because they are. They are 100% real. The activity on my property has got to a point to where, I never thought I would be standing in front of one 50 feet away, completely unobstructed during the day. Well, I definitely didn't think that I would be experiencing the things that I've been experiencing on my own property. It's gone from just having activity around the perimeter of my property at night, whether it be a wood knock or a break or a vocal or something like that. For years, that's pretty much all it was. It's like they would come out and they would get my attention, do something. If I was lucky, I'd get it recorded. And that's pretty much it. And that's how it went on for years until 2023. That's when things changed. And it's around the same time where I started gifting. And I started leaving eggs and leaving other stuff. And after doing that, I can't remember if I brought this up in the first podcast or not. I was left a Native American skinning rock and a squirrel and all that good stuff. So it looked like we were getting kind of this little gifting pattern going. And there was one night in 2023 where I was going out. So you've got my property and it goes downhill towards the management area. And then you cross the creek and it comes back up into the management area property. Well, on the other side of that creek is kind of what I consider their hill, is what I call it. And there's just, there's a lot of stuff they can hide behind, and that's where I've been leaving the eggs and all that. Well, I went out there one evening, like I always do, went out there at night, and I was just checking, to see if they had taken anything or if I'd find anything interesting or whatever. And I think I left something that night. I can't remember exactly what I was doing, but it had something to do with gifting. Well, on my way back, I went to step across the creek, and back from behind me where I was just at, where I was checking the gifts, there was a knock. And I'm like, that's obviously them. That's pretty interesting. So I kept walking and I got to a log and I just sat down on that log. And after that knock, there was a throw. They threw an object. So I got up and I threw an object. And I waited for a minute, nothing happened. And then I walked up the hill. There's this clearing. Now I just call it my sitting spot, or if I'm feeling froggy and special, I call it OP Ghost Monkey, because that's where all this stuff has been happening for the past 3 years. I'll go and sit down in this clearing where this log is. And on that night, there was a second throw, which doesn't sound like much, but it was a pretty big deal to have them do a wood knock and then have them throw objects that were fairly close to me, to where I wasn't having to guess what was going on at all. And that night would start a cycle that's been going on since 2023, that's going all the way up till Monday of last week. And what usually happens in September, October, November is I will go out to that sitting spot and I will do wood knock. People say wood knocks don't work. They do 100% work. I don't know exactly what it means when you do it, but I will go out there and I won't do anything crazy like you see on TV where you're whacking the heck out of a big tree. All I do is pick up a simple stick and then smack a log. Usually I only do it once. And usually in between 5 to 30 minutes later, they will show up and then they will stay just, at the right distance. I've got thermals. I've got body cam. I've got it set up now where I can record 360 degrees around me with, 3 different cameras. It's still not good enough. They stay out of range of that. But what they will do is they will stay on the perimeter of that hill and down in that creek, and they will run around. They will break things. They will vocalize. They will throw objects. And I literally have 3 years of this activity recorded. Crazy vocalizations. I finally this year has been a really, really good one. There's been a couple times where I've recorded their throws where you can see it actually come in front of the camera, but none of them were like, smoking gun. Somebody, if they wanted to, they could claim that And maybe it was an object falling out of a tree. Well, the one I just recorded this year is not like that at all. I was using the 4-camera setup, and luckily I had one of them. I was actually done for the night, and I was on my way back, and all I did was set the camera up against a tree on a tripod, and I had my body camera on, and they threw a rock, and it was too close to me for the body camera to get it, but luckily the camera leaning up against the tree did, and it's just as obvious as can be. It's just a rock hauling butt across the ground, and it's this researching these creatures has taken more patience than I've ever thought I was actually capable of. I mean, you should have seen the excitement after, I've been doing this for 7 years now. And I was just unbelievably excited about getting this rock recorded on camera. That's how patient you have to be, and how hard it is to get, solid proof of them physically doing things. But I've gotten a lot of good evidence over the years. A ton of vocalizations. I've gotten a few thermals. Everything's on the YouTube channel, the Sasquatch Encounter Brigade. Here recently, one of the last really important things that happened Monday. And it's something it's still a little confusing to me. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but I had gone out in the woods that night. I came back. I'm sitting on the porch, and I've got one of my body cameras up there on the railing. And that body camera is just there for, I always keep something out there to record vocalizations. Because usually what happens is they'll do something, and then I'll go get a piece of equipment and turn it on, and then maybe get the second thing. Well, not anymore. I record at all times now. Well, I'm just sitting there, and I've got that body camera on the rail, and all of a sudden you hear, first it sounds like knocking on my deck. And then a series, what it sounds like, somebody's got 2 sticks in their hands, and they're just banging the heck out of my deck, banging the heck out of the bushes, and then they throw a stick or an object and it hits the porch. And that's pretty much it. Well, what I hear, because I'm sitting on the front porch listening, I think I'm watching an Instagram video of some sort. It's like the worst video I could be watching at that moment too, because the guy says, I know you got kids that watch. He says the inappropriate word in the middle of this video, unfortunately. But I think what has taken place is a rock or a stick has been thrown from the wood line, and it just hit my porch, which I'm super excited about, because I know from the direction that my camera is facing that surely it got the arc of this object coming in and hitting the porch. Well, I go inside, I take the video, download it on the computer, and that's not what happened at all. It sounds like this thing is like literally underneath my deck, or at the very least at the end of it. And it kind of bangs on the porch a couple times. And then, like I said, it takes those sticks like a professional drummer and starts hitting the porch and hitting the leaves. And after that happens, I still think it's a throw. I say, please, God, tell me that recorded. And after I say that, there's a huff. It just goes, oh, like that. So after all these years, and I think probably what had happened, I raised German Shepherds, and I've got a horse fence around my property. Well, about 3 weeks to a month ago, we had a kitten that showed up, and it's been living on our front porch. Well, the dogs chase it. So we've been keeping the dogs inside pretty much all night, unless they've got to go to the bathroom, and then we bring them out. And I think that's pretty much what's happened is they've now, I've got a recording from a couple of years ago where they were on my back deck. I had a camera in the back of the house, and I got up one morning. I was feeling super sick. I didn't even know if I was going to be able to go to work. I went and laid down on the couch for a minute, and I'm laying there, and I hear this really deep talking, this really deep voice coming from the back of my house. And then the dogs go absolutely nuts. They're outside. So I get up and I get my composure, take Pepto, get ready for work or whatever. And then I get I get to work and I pull up the video that's at the driveway camera, and the audio that it picks up, it sounds like these things are on the back deck, walking, talking, and running off, and the dogs are chasing them. That's the closest experience I had to them being around the house. But what happened this past Monday pretty much takes the cake. And I guess the final thing I'll say about all this is there's a lot of people that have questions on what these creatures are. And I did I'm not a professional. I make YouTube documentaries sometimes, but I made a documentary this year talking about how I have experienced spiritual events that took place starting in 2012 and went for a couple of years. And it was me, my wife, and my children. And it was pretty much life-changing spiritual events involving what some people call orbs. At the time, I think they were angels. But I had these events happen. It was, long story short, it basically saved my marriage. We saw it as an intervention, and then my kids would end up seeing these things. Well, that would eventually stop, and then a few years later, the Sasquatch activity would start. And I'm an open-minded person, but I have personally never seen any crossover between the two. I know there's a lot of people that think these creatures are interdimensional or spiritual or whatever else. I have not seen evidence of that yet, but, I'll be the first one to tell you if it ever happens. But what I will say is this. There has been a few weird things that have happened over the years. And one of those weird things is it always seems like when it comes to their luck in cameras and then my luck in cameras, video cameras, they always get the good luck and I always get the bad luck. Like the event that happened Monday, that body camera is facing right down pretty much where it should be. Almost gets to the end of the bushes and it almost gets to the end of the porch. But it's turned to the right, maybe a 1/16 of an inch too much. If it would have been turned to the left just a little bit, I probably would have got whatever it was on camera. And that is one thing I have found weird over the years. It's just maybe it's just my bad luck, and that you've just got to be ready at all times. And it's very helpful if you can record 360 degrees at all times. But that's my goal eventually, and that takes money, but we will get there one day. And that's pretty much it. We're pretty much all caught up with all the past activity and current activity.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the 5-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. The sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. His pickup man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, booking 8 bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something coming backwards in double time, getting to the soul in this tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something going backwards in double time, getting in the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Something going backwards in double time, getting in the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm, fried chicken, porch swing, mama's best sweet tea kind of sound.